A security guard assaults a young black man at a concert entrance, but he was the main artist. What happens next is shocking. A shout pierced the New York night, cutting through the air like a sharp blade. "Hey, you, stop right there!" The young black man froze, his heart racing. How had a simple concert night turned into a nightmare so quickly? Marcus, a talented 23-year-old rapper, was about to realize his life's dream, opening for his idol at one of the biggest venues in New York City. It was a Monday night, January 27th, 2025, and excitement crackled in the air like electricity. But what should have been the happiest moment of his life was about to turn into a battle for dignity and justice. And there you have it, folks. Before we continue, don't forget to hit that cheeky like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell to never miss a story as thrilling as this one. And in the comments, tell us which city you're watching from. Now let's get back to the story as it heats up. As Marcus approached the VIP entrance of Madison Square Garden, he was confronted by a burly security guard with a stern look. "ID and ticket," the man demanded, his voice laced with suspicion. Marcus, dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans, calmly explained that he was the opening act. The security guard laughed mockingly. "Sure, and I'm Jay-Z. Move along, kid." The situation escalated quickly. Harsh words were exchanged, pushing ensued. Within seconds, Marcus found himself on the ground, the security guard's knee pressing into his back. The pain was intense, but nothing compared to the humiliation he felt. How could he prove who he was? What if he lost the chance of a lifetime because of this misunderstanding? Meanwhile, inside, the show's crew was starting to worry about the opening act's delay. Marcus's manager, frantically searching the backstage area for his talent, was growing desperate. Tension mounted with each passing minute, and the audience was beginning to get restless. Will Marcus manage to prove his identity in time? How will this situation affect his career and his view of the music world? And what consequences will this incident have for the security guard and Madison Square Garden? The cold concrete of the New York sidewalk pressed against Marcus's face as his mind swirled in a maelstrom of emotions. Flashbacks of his childhood in the Bronx flooded his thoughts. Nights when he and his friends were stopped and frisked by police for no reason. Doors closing when he entered stores, suspicious glances following him. But Marcus had never imagined he'd face this kind of discrimination on the night that was supposed to be his big break. Meanwhile, Sarah, the young event producer, was running through the backstage area of Madison Square Garden, her heart pounding with worry. At 28, and already responsible for some of the city's biggest shows, she knew that every minute of delay could spell disaster for the evening. Her hazel eyes, normally full of determination, now reflected pure panic. "Where's Marcus? Has anyone seen Marcus?" she asked frantically, her curly hair bouncing as she moved from side to side. The headset on her head buzzed with worried voices from the tech crew. Outside, the security guard, Mike, a middle-aged man with a perpetually furrowed brow, kept Marcus pinned down. Years of working in nightclubs had hardened Mike, making him see threats in every unfamiliar face. But there was something deeper, an ingrained prejudice that he even denied to himself. "I told you, I'm the artist," Marcus shouted, his voice muffled against the ground. "My name is Marcus Johnson, known as MC Mark. Please check the list." Mike hesitated for a moment. A flicker of doubt crossed his wrinkled face, but was quickly replaced by the mask of authority he wore like armor. At that moment, David, Marcus's manager, a 40-year-old black man always elegant in his well-cut suit, finally arrived at the VIP entrance. His eyes widened at the scene. "What the hell is going on here?" he thundered, his usually calm voice charged with indignation. David's arrival created a moment of confusion. Mike, caught off guard, slightly loosened his grip on Marcus. It was enough for the young rapper to break free, quickly standing up. "David, thank God you're here," Marcus exclaimed, his voice shaking with relief and contained anger. David positioned himself between Marcus and Mike, his imposing presence creating a protective barrier. "This young man," he said, pointing to Marcus, "is tonight's opening act, and you—" He turned to Mike, his eyes flashing. "You've just made a terrible mistake." Mike's face paled as the reality of the situation began to sink in. His mind raced, searching for justifications, excuses, anything to explain his actions. At that moment, Sarah burst through the door, out of breath. "Marcus, thank God I found you. We're late. You need to get ready now." She stopped abruptly, her eyes darting from Marcus to David to Mike, quickly grasping the tension of the scene. "What's going on here?" Marcus, still shaking with adrenaline, looked at Sarah. "This security guard assaulted me. He didn't believe I was the artist." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah looked at Mike in horror, who now seemed diminished, his authoritative posture visibly crumbling. This is unacceptable," Sarah stammered, indignation coloring her voice. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. This should never have happened." David, keeping his cool but with controlled fury in his voice, said, "We'll deal with this later. Right now, Marcus needs to get ready for the show." As they headed inside, Marcus cast one last glance at Mike. It wasn't a look of hatred, but of determination. Tonight, he knew, wouldn't just be about music. It would be about proving his worth, about turning injustice into art, about using his voice not just to sing, but to speak out. The backstage area of Madison Square Garden was buzzing with activity as Marcus prepared to take the stage. His team, a mix of childhood friends and hired professionals, frantically bustled around him. The air was charged with tension and anticipation. "5 minutes, Marcus," yelled Jasmine, his makeup artist and longtime friend. She was putting the final touches on his face, trying to conceal the signs of the recent altercation. Their eyes met in the mirror, conveying a mix of concern and silent encouragement. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The incident with the security guard still pulsed in his mind, an open wound threatening to infect his performance. But he knew he couldn't let that happen. This was his chance, the moment he had worked tirelessly for. David entered the dressing room, his serious face contrasting with the surrounding commotion. "Marcus, we need to talk about what happened." "Not now, David," Marcus replied, adjusting the mic on his shirt. "I've got a show to do." "That's exactly why we need to talk," David insisted. "What happened out there was unacceptable, but we can't let it affect your performance. Thousands of people are waiting for you." Marcus turned to face his manager, his eyes blazing with a mix of anger and determination. "Affect my performance? David, this is exactly what's going to fuel my performance. Every verse, every rhyme is going to carry the weight of what happened today." At that moment, Sarah burst into the dressing room, her face a mask of professional concern. "Marcus, everything's ready. We need you on stage in 2 minutes." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Look, I know what happened was horrible. I've already started the procedures to fire Mike, but right now I need you to focus on the show. Thousands of fans are waiting." Marcus nodded, his expression hardening. "Don't worry, Sarah. They're going to get a show they'll never forget." As he headed towards the stage, Marcus could feel the weight of expectations on his shoulders. It wasn't just the expectations of his fans, but those of his community, of all those who had ever faced the same kind of discrimination he had just experienced. The lights went out, and the crowd roared in anticipation. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the sound of the audience wash over him like a wave. As the first chords of his opening song began to play, he felt a transformation taking place within him. Stepping onto the stage, Marcus, now fully embodied in his persona as MC Mark, began to rap with an intensity that surprised even his most devoted fans. His lyrics, always sharp and critical, took on a new dimension of urgency and anger. "You think you know my story, but the truth hides in your memory. To get here I had to go through hell, but not all demons wear a suit and tie." The crowd vibrated with every verse, feeling the raw emotion in his words. Backstage, David and Sarah watched, a mix of pride and concern on their faces. As the show progressed, Marcus's performance became increasingly intense. He improvised new lyrics, directly addressing the night's incident. Security at the door, but who's really secure? It ain't about skin color, it's the prejudice in the dark. You stop me, you throw me down, but you can't silence my sound. My voice is my weapon, and I'll keep fighting, no doubt. The audience reacted with shouts of support and raised fists. The energy in the room was electric, a mix of revolt and solidarity. Backstage, news of the incident began to spread. Journalists present to cover the concert now had a much bigger story on their hands. Smartphones captured snippets of Marcus's performance, sending them to social media, where they quickly began to go viral. Meanwhile, Mike, the security guard, watched everything from afar, his face a mask of regret and fear. He knew his career was probably over, but the consequences of his actions went far beyond that. Midway through the show, the headline act, Marcus's idol, appeared backstage. Informed of the incident, he decided to do something unthinkable, completely change the show's script. When Marcus finished his set, panting and covered in sweat, he was surprised by the announcement that the headliner wanted him to stay on stage. "Tonight," said the voice amplified by the speakers, "I'm not the main attraction. It's this young warrior who faced injustice and turned his pain into art." The crowd exploded in applause. Marcus, stunned, found himself at the center of a moment that went far beyond his music career. It was a moment of change, of confrontation with the deep-rooted injustices in American society. As the lights flickered and the music resonated, Marcus knew that this night was just the beginning. The revenge he sought wasn't against an individual, but against an entire system. And his weapon would be his music, his words, his truth. As the show continued, a web of events unfolded backstage and beyond, adding layers of complexity to the already tense situation. In the security office of Madison Square Garden, Mike sat with his head down, facing Greg, the head of security. The air was heavy with a mix of disappointment and contained anger. "Do you realize the bomb you've just created?" Greg asked, his voice low but charged with frustration. "Years of building a reputation as an inclusive concert venue, and you throw it all away in a few minutes." Mike, eyes fixed on the floor, mumbled, I didn't know who he was. I thought he was just another freeloader trying to get in for free." "And that justifies violence?" Greg retorted. "Since when is not knowing who someone is a reason to assault them?" Meanwhile, Sarah was on the phone with the event's press service, trying to control the damage. Social media was already exploding with videos and comments about the incident. "No, don't confirm anything yet," she instructed, running her hand through her hair in a gesture of frustration. "We're investigating the incident, and we'll take appropriate action. We'll issue an official statement soon." Hanging up, Sarah found herself facing an ethical and professional dilemma. She knew the public reaction would be fierce, but she also understood the complexities of managing a security team in a city like New York. How to balance the need for security with the imperative to fight structural racism. Meanwhile, in the VIP lounge, an unexpected scene was unfolding. Amber, a digital influencer with millions of followers, had witnessed the incident from the balcony. Now she was engaged in a heated discussion with her boyfriend Tom, an entrepreneur in the event industry. "You can't just ignore what happened, Tom," Amber exclaimed, her eyes blazing with indignation. "We have a platform, a responsibility." Tom, visibly uncomfortable, tried to calm her down. "Amber, think about this. If we get involved in this, we could lose contracts. It's complicated." "Complicated," Amber interrupted. "Complicated is being black in this country and having to face this kind of situation every day." This discussion represented a microcosm of the broader debate that was about to explode in American society. Social media was already boiling, with hashtags like Russian Justice for Marcus and Russian Racism is Not Security quickly gaining traction. On stage, oblivious to all these subplots, Marcus continued his transformative performance. Each verse was like a punch to the gut of the status quo. Each rhyme a denunciation of the injustices he and so many others faced daily. David, observing from the wings, realized that this moment transcended Marcus's career. It was a tipping point not only for the young rapper, but potentially for the entire American music industry. Heavy-hearted, David made a call. "Mr. Johnson, it's David, Marcus's manager. We need to talk about legal measures to take. What happened tonight can't go unpunished." As the lawyer spoke on the other end of the line, David watched Marcus on stage. The young man he had discovered years ago during a rap battle in the Bronx was becoming a symbol of resistance before his eyes. In the midst of the crowd, Jasmine, Marcus's makeup artist and childhood friend, cried silently. She had known Marcus since childhood. She knew all the struggles and challenges he had faced. Seeing him transform this pain into such powerful art was both inspiring and heartbreaking. As the show approached its climax, it became clear to everyone present that this evening wouldn't just be memorable as another concert. It was the birth of a movement, the moment when music became a battle cry against injustice. Marcus, bathed in sweat and adrenaline, had no idea of the waves his words were creating. At that moment, he was just a young man using his art to exercise personal and societal demons. But his actions that night were about to trigger a series of events that would shake the foundations of the entertainment industry and force a long-overdue confrontation with structural racism in America. The concert was nearing its end, the energy at Madison Square Garden palpable, electric. Marcus, exhausted but exhilarated, was preparing for his final song when something unexpected happened. The headliner of the night, the famous rapper Kendrick Lamar, stepped onto the stage. The crowd roared in approval, but Kendrick's serious expression silenced everyone. He took the microphone and, in a voice charged with emotion, began to speak. "My brothers and sisters, this is not an ordinary night. Today we haven't just witnessed an incredible concert, but an act of resistance, of courage." He turned to Marcus, placing his hand on his shoulder. "Brother, what you faced tonight is what many of us face daily, but you've transformed this pain into art, into revolution." The audience was in absolute silence, absorbing every word. Marcus, taken by surprise, felt tears forming in his eyes. Kendrick continued, "I'm here to announce that from today, my label is offering a contract to Marcus. But that's not all. We're going to create a fund to support young artists from minority backgrounds who face discrimination in the industry." The crowd exploded in applause and cheers of approval. Marcus, stunned, hugged Kendrick, unable to contain his tears. Backstage, David and Sarah exchanged a shocked look. This was a turning point not only for Marcus, but for the entire American music industry. Meanwhile, on social media, Kendrick's announcement was spreading like wildfire. Hashtags like Joe, Kendrick and Marcus and Revolution in Music began to dominate trends. In the security office, Mike watched all of this on television, his face a mask of regret and shame. He realized that his actions hadn't just cost him his job, but had inadvertently catalyzed significant change in the entertainment industry. Back on stage, Marcus, still emotional, took the microphone. I don't know what to say. A few hours ago, I was on the ground, humiliated. Now I'm standing here, stronger than ever. This isn't about me. It's about all of us who have ever been judged by the color of our skin, by how we dress, by who we are." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "But I'm not going to lie to you. It still hurts. I'm still angry. And this anger, this pain, will fuel my art, because art is our most powerful weapon against prejudice and ignorance." Marcus's words resonated throughout the hall, touching hearts and minds. In the middle of the crowd, Amber, the influencer, was live-streaming everything to her millions of followers, tears streaming down her made-up face. In the VIP lounge, music industry executives whispered among themselves, realizing that the landscape was changing before their eyes. They knew they would have to adapt or be left behind. Kendrick, taking the microphone again, made one last announcement. And that's not all, family. Tomorrow, we're holding a press conference. We're going to expose all the discriminatory practices we know of in the industry. It's time to clean house. This announcement sent shockwaves backstage. Sarah, already on the phone with her superiors, knew the next few days would be a whirlwind. David, meanwhile, felt a mix of pride and apprehension. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also recognized the historical importance of this moment. When the concert finally ended, the audience left Madison Square Garden not just entertained, but transformed. Animated conversations about racism, representation, and social change dominated the subway queues and groups of friends dispersing into the New York streets. Marcus, exhausted but electrified, sat in his dressing room trying to process everything that had just happened. Jasmine, his makeup artist friend, entered quietly and hugged him, both crying tears of joy and relief. "You did it, Marcus," she whispered. "You turned something horrible into something powerful." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. He knew his life had changed forever that night. The contract with Kendrick's label, the fund for minority artists, the national exposure, all of this represented opportunities he had never imagined having. But with these opportunities came responsibilities. He was now more than an artist. He was a symbol, a voice for those who had long been silenced. As the night wore on, news of the incident and its repercussions spread throughout America. Passionate debates erupted on television, radio, and social media. The incident at Madison Square Garden had become a catalyst for a national conversation about racism and representation in the entertainment industry. Marcus, lying in his bed that night, unable to sleep due to the adrenaline and emotions of the day, realized that his journey was just beginning. The revenge he sought was no longer personal, but a mission of systemic change, and he was ready to lead this fight, with his music as his most powerful weapon. The days following the concert were a whirlwind of emotions and events for Marcus and everyone involved. The press conference promised by Kendrick Lamar took place, and as expected, it sent shockwaves through the American music industry. Marcus, sitting alongside Kendrick, shared his story in painful detail, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Journalists from across the country listened in stunned silence as he described not only the recent incident, but years of microaggressions and discrimination he had endured, as had so many other artists from minority backgrounds. Kendrick, for his part, spared no one. He exposed discriminatory practices of major record labels, concert venues, and even some established artists. "It's time to clean house," he declared, his voice thundering in the room. "We can no longer pretend that racism doesn't exist in our industry." The reactions were immediate and intense. Within hours of the press conference, several major record labels and producers released statements promising to review their hiring policies and representation practices. Some went as far as announcing internal audits to investigate cases of discrimination. On social media, the hashtag #JustMusicWithoutRacism went viral, with artists of all genres sharing their own experiences of prejudice in the industry. Marcus's story became a rallying point, inspiring a new generation of artists to speak out against injustice. Meanwhile, Madison Square Garden was facing its own crisis. Mike's firing was just the beginning. The venue announced a complete overhaul of its security protocols and promised to implement mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees. Sarah, the young producer, found herself at the center of a whirlwind. She spent days in tense meetings with management, advocating for significant changes in the company culture. "We can't treat this as an isolated incident," she argued. "We need systemic changes." For Marcus, the days passed in a blur of interviews, meetings, and studio sessions. The contract with Kendrick's label materialized, and he found himself working on a new album that promised to be his most personal and political work to date. David, his manager, struggled to keep up with the flood of offers and opportunities that were coming in. Concerts, TV show appearances, invitations to speak at universities. Marcus's schedule was busier than ever, but not everything was rosy. With greater visibility came criticism and threats. Marcus began receiving hate messages on his social media, some even escalating to death threats. Security became a real concern, forcing David to hire bodyguards for his client. Mike's case also had unexpected developments. After his firing, he gave an emotional interview to a local newspaper, admitting his mistakes and expressing deep regret. "I never considered myself racist," he said, tears in his eyes. "But now I see how my unconscious biases affected my actions. I want to learn and change." This interview generated intense debate about redemption and second chances. Some argued that Mike deserved an opportunity to make amends, while others insisted that his actions had irrevocable consequences. Amidst all this turmoil, Marcus found a moment of calm to visit his family in the Bronx. Sitting in his mother's small living room, surrounded by childhood photos, he reflected on how far he had come and all that remained to be done. "My son," his mother said, holding his hands, "you now carry the weight of many hopes. Don't forget to take care of yourself too." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of these words. He knew the months and years ahead would be challenging. The fight against racism in the music industry and in society as a whole was far from over. But he was determined to use his new platform and influence to bring about real and lasting change. As he left his mother's house, Marcus received a message from Kendrick. "Ready to record tomorrow? We're about to make history, brother." A smile formed on his lips. The next battle was just beginning. The months that followed were an intense journey of personal and professional growth for Marcus. The studio became his second home, where he channeled his experiences, frustrations, and hopes into powerful verses and captivating rhythms. Working alongside Kendrick Lamar and other renowned artists, Marcus began to broaden his musical horizons. He experimented with new styles, fusing rap with elements of soul, R&B, and even electronic music. Each track was a statement, a story of resistance and overcoming. "I don't want to be known just as the rapper who was assaulted," Marcus explained during a recording session. "I want my music to speak for itself, to touch people and make them think." As the album took shape, Marcus confronted his own inner demons. Therapy sessions, initially suggested by David to help him deal with the trauma of the incident, became a fundamental pillar in his journey of self-awareness. "I realized I was carrying much more than the weight of that night," Marcus confided to his therapist. "It was years of microaggressions, doubts about my worth, pent-up anger. I'm learning to deal with all of this in a healthy way." This personal growth was reflected in his music and public interactions. During interviews, Marcus spoke with a new depth and maturity about racial and social issues. He was no longer just a promising rapper, but an eloquent spokesman for a generation tired of injustices. Meanwhile, the fund for minority artists created by Kendrick Lamar, with Marcus's support, was beginning to bear fruit. Young talents from all over America were receiving financial support and mentorship to develop their careers. Marcus actively participated in this process, offering guidance and inspiration to new artists. "I see a lot of myself in these young people," Marcus commented at a fund event. "The talent, the determination, but also the fear and insecurity. I want to show them that it's possible to succeed, that their voices matter." However, not everything was victories. Marcus faced backlash from more conservative sectors of the music industry and society. Some accused him of victimization or exaggerating the incident to gain notoriety. Others questioned his authenticity, claiming he had sold out his story. These criticisms, though painful, served as fuel for Marcus. Instead of backing down, he confronted them head-on, using his social media and music to refute accusations and educate his audience. A particularly powerful moment occurred during a concert in New York, 6 months after the incident. In the middle of his performance, Marcus spotted Mike, the ex-security guard, in the audience. Instead of ignoring him or having him ejected, Marcus invited him on stage. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus extended his hand to Mike, who accepted it hesitantly. In front of thousands of stunned fans, the two men embraced. "This is a moment of healing," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice choked with emotion. "Not of forgetting, but of learning and growth. If we want to change the world, we must be ready to change ourselves first." This gesture of reconciliation created shockwaves in the media and on social networks. Many praised Marcus's maturity and compassion, while others criticized him for being too soft on his aggressor. Marcus, however, remained firm in his decision. "Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or accepting what happened," he later explained in an interview. "It means freeing yourself from the weight of hatred and bitterness. Only then can we truly move forward and create lasting change." As the album release approached, Marcus felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. He knew this work represented not only his evolution as an artist, but also as a human being. The album, titled Renaissance, was a sonic journey through pain, anger, hope, and renewal. Each track told a story, not just Marcus's, but that of an entire generation struggling for recognition and equality. The night before the launch, Marcus gathered with his team, David, Jasmine, Sarah, who had become a close friend and ally, and several others who had supported him throughout this journey. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he said, raising a toast, "we've already won. Every conversation we've started, every mind we've opened, every life we've touched, that's the real success." As the group celebrated, Marcus silently reflected on his journey. He had entered that fateful night as a young rapper full of dreams and emerged as a catalyst for change. The road ahead was still long and full of obstacles, but for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt truly ready to face them. The day of Renaissance album release finally arrived, bringing with it an atmosphere of anticipation and nervousness. Marcus's team had organized a grand launch event at the very same Madison Square Garden, where everything had started a year ago. A symbolic and bold decision. Backstage, the energy was palpable. Marcus, dressed in an elegant suit created by an emerging designer from a minority background, adjusted his mic while Jasmine gave final touches to his makeup. "Are you ready for this?" David asked, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "More than ever," he replied with a mix of determination and anxiety in his voice. Sarah burst into the dressing room. "Guys, you need to see this," she said, pointing to her tablet. On the screen, live images showed an immense crowd forming outside Madison Square Garden. These weren't just fans. There were activists, artists, journalists, and even some political figures. The album launch had transformed into a major cultural event. "This is bigger than we imagined," Marcus murmured, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Meanwhile, backstage, final preparations were underway. Kendrick Lamar, who was set to make a special appearance, arrived accompanied by other artists who had collaborated on the album. The atmosphere was one of camaraderie and mutual support, but also of palpable tension. "Remember what we talked about," Kendrick said to Marcus in a private moment. "Tonight isn't about you or me. It's about all those out there who need to hear this message." Marcus nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude towards the mentor Kendrick had become. As the showtime approached, Marcus received a series of supportive messages from his family, international artists who had heard his story, and even some celebrities who had previously remained silent on racial issues. One message in particular touched him deeply. It came from a young fan. "Your music saved me, man. It made me believe I could be somebody, even when the world told me I couldn't. Thank you for not giving up." These words resonated with Marcus, reminding him of the true purpose behind all of this. A few minutes before going on stage, Marcus gathered his entire team in a circle. "No matter what happens out there," he said, his voice firm, "we've already won just by being here. Each of you is part of this victory." The group hugged, a moment of unity before the storm. Meanwhile, outside, the atmosphere was electric. Fans were singing snippets of the new songs that had leaked. Activists were distributing flyers about racial awareness, and media were positioning their cameras, anticipating a historic event. Suddenly, a murmur ran through the crowd. Mike, the ex-security guard, had arrived. Some recognized him and started shouting, creating a moment of tension. However, to everyone's surprise, he wasn't alone. Accompanying him was a group of security guards from various New York concert venues, all wearing T-shirts with the inscription, "Security without prejudice." This unexpected gesture added a new emotional dimension to the event. It was a sign that change was happening, slowly but surely. Inside the hall, final sound checks were being performed. Marcus's band, composed entirely of talented musicians from diverse backgrounds, was in place. The lights dimmed, and an almost palpable anticipation gripped the atmosphere. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, recalling his entire journey, from rap battles in the Bronx to this crucial moment. He thought about all the obstacles, the doubts, the small and big victories that had brought him here. "It's time," David said softly. Marcus opened his eyes, ready. He knew that what was about to happen wasn't just a concert or an album launch. It was the culmination of a movement, the beginning of a new era in American music and, who knows, in society as a whole. With one last deep breath, Marcus stepped towards the stage, ready to make history. The lights went out, and an expectant silence engulfed Madison Square Garden. Suddenly, a single beam of light illuminated the center of the stage, revealing Marcus standing still, microphone in hand. The crowd held its breath, anticipating the moment. Without warning, Marcus began to sing a cappella, his powerful and emotional voice resonating throughout the hall. "In the shadows of the city where prejudice reigns, a young dreamer struggles to break the chains. But in an instant, everything crumbles, thrown to the ground, but the soul unbreakable." The audience was mesmerized. Then slowly, the instruments began to enter, building a musical bass that grew in intensity. The first song, Renaissance, the album's title track, was a raw and emotional account of the incident that had changed Marcus's life and the process of overcoming that followed. As the performance progressed, it became clear that this was no ordinary concert. It was a cathartic experience both for Marcus and for the audience. Each song told a story, addressed a different aspect of the fight against racism and the journey of self-discovery. Midway through the show, Marcus paused. The silence was deafening. "A year ago, I was on the ground in this very place, humiliated and angry," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Today, I stand, not just for myself, but for all of us who have been silenced." At that moment, to everyone's surprise, Marcus invited Mike, the ex-security guard, onto the stage. The tension in the air was palpable. Mike, visibly nervous, stepped to the center of the stage. "What happened that night was wrong," Mike said into the microphone, his voice charged with emotion. "But from that mistake came an opportunity for change, not just for me, but for many others." Marcus then announced that Mike had become an anti-racism activist, working to educate security teams across America about unconscious biases and fair treatment. The audience, at first hesitant, burst into applause. This moment of reconciliation and transformation elevated the concert to a new level. The energy was palpable, a mix of emotion, indignation, and above all, hope. As the concert neared its end, Marcus brought Kendrick Lamar and other collaborating artists on stage. Together they performed New Day, the song that closed the album, a powerful anthem to unity and social change. But the true climax of the evening was yet to come. For the last song, Marcus surprised everyone by bringing onto the stage a choir of 50 young people from underprivileged neighborhoods across America, all participants in the mentoring program he had created with Kendrick Lamar's fund. When the first notes of "The Future Is Ours" began to resound, emotion overwhelmed the hall. The song, an inspiring rap about empowerment and hope, took on a whole new dimension with the young voices joining Marcus's. The performance reached its peak when, in the final chorus, Marcus shouted, "The future is ours, say it with me!" The crowd responded in a deafening chorus, voices rising in unison, resonating not only in Madison Square Garden, but also in the surrounding streets, where thousands who couldn't get in were watching on giant screens. As the last note resonated, Marcus, surrounded by the young choir members, Kendrick Lamar, his band, and collaborators, raised his fist in the air, a gesture of resistance and hope. The audience mimicked the gesture, creating a powerful image of unity and determination. The lights went out, leaving only the glow of thousands of cell phones illuminating the space. When they came back on, they revealed Marcus on his knees on the stage, tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. Backstage, David, Sarah, and Jasmine hugged each other, also moved. They knew they had witnessed not only an incredible concert, but a historic moment in American music. As the audience applauded endlessly, calling for more, Marcus slowly stood up. He looked at the crowd, the young people by his side, his collaborators and friends. At that moment, he understood that his journey of personal overcoming had transformed into something much bigger. "This is just the beginning," he said into the microphone, his voice charged with emotion and determination. "Together, we're going to rewrite our history." With these words, Marcus left the stage to a deafening ovation. The concert was over, but the impact of this evening was just beginning. Renaissance wasn't just an album title, it was the beginning of a new era in American music and society. In the weeks and months following the release of Renaissance, the impact of Marcus's album and concert was felt across America and beyond. The album debuted at the top of the charts, not only in the United States, but in several European countries as well. Music critics hailed it as a masterpiece, praising not only the musical quality, but also the depth and relevance of its lyrics. More importantly, Renaissance catalyzed crucial conversations about racism and representation in the entertainment industry and American society at large. Schools began using Marcus's lyrics in sociology and literature classes. Television debates and podcasts devoted entire episodes to analyzing the album and its cultural impact. The Fund for Minority Artists, initiated by Kendrick Lamar and supported by Marcus, saw a significant increase in donations and corporate support. In its first year, the fund succeeded in supporting over 100 young artists across America, providing not only financial resources, but also mentorship and networking opportunities. Marcus, now a prominent figure not only in music, but also in social activism, was invited to give lectures at universities, participate in panels at international conferences, and even speak at the United Nations about combating racism in America. Madison Square Garden, the scene of the original incident and the launch concert, implemented significant changes in its policies. Not only did they revise their security protocols, but they also launched a diversity program that became a model for other concert venues across the country. Mike, the ex-security guard, continued his awareness work, collaborating with Marcus on workshops and conferences. His story of personal transformation inspired many others to confront their own prejudices and seek change. For Marcus, success brought not only fame and recognition, but also a deep sense of responsibility. He used his platform to continue raising important issues, collaborating with other artists and activists, and inspiring a new generation of young people from diverse backgrounds to believe in themselves and their dreams. 1 year after the release of Renaissance, Marcus returned to the studio to begin work on his next album. This time, he was no longer just a young rapper with something to prove, but a mature artist aware of his power of influence. Reflecting on his journey, Marcus realized that the true revenge against prejudice and discrimination was not retribution, but success and the ability to create positive change. He had transformed a moment of humiliation into a movement of empowerment and hope. As he prepared to record the first track of his new album, Marcus smiled, remembering his mother's words, "You now carry the weight of many hopes." He knew the road ahead would still be challenging, but he was ready to continue the fight, not just for himself, but for all those his music and story had touched. 5 years after the release of Renaissance, Marcus stood on the stage of a sold-out Staples Center in Los Angeles, facing a crowd of 20,000 people. His latest album, Legacy, had broken all records. But for Marcus, true success went beyond numbers. He looked at the front row where young artists he had mentored were about to perform next. Backstage, David, Sarah, and Jasmine smiled proudly, and on a giant screen, a message shone: Education and Culture Against Racism, the name of the foundation Marcus had created. The dream continued, more alive than ever. And there you have it, folks. If you've made it this far in this incredible journey, you're part of this change. Marcus's story is more than just entertainment. It's a call to action. So if this story touched your heart, don't let it stop here. Share it with your friends, reflect on your own attitudes, and be an agent of change in your daily life. Don't forget to leave in the comments, "I watched until the end, and I'm committed to change." And hey, check out the video that appears at the end. There's more inspiring content waiting for you. Together, we can create a more just and equal future. Change begins with each of us.